Welcome, dear listeners, from wherever you are joining us tonight. Before we begin, tell me, where are you tuning in from?
Tonight, we step into the hidden corridors of history, into stories preserved in silence and ink.
Can you believe that the very concept of life itself, the green fields, the golden grain, the sweet scent of flowers, was merely annihilated because of one silent, terrifying desire? This is not a simple romance. This is the story of a cosmic kidnapping that ripped the fabric of reality, triggering a global catastrophe that brought Olympus to its knees and starved every mortal soul on Earth. Before the terror, there was only perfection. There was Kor, the maiden, the most beautiful, vibrant creature ever to walk the sun-drenched surface of the world. She was the absolute joy of her mother, the mighty Demeter, goddess of the harvest, the keeper of all fertility. Demeter's love for her daughter was not merely parental affection. It was a fundamental force of nature. If Kori smiled, the crops grew taller. If she laughed, the rivers ran clearer. She was the living embodiment of spring, untouched, innocent, and tragically unaware that the oldest, darkest, and most powerful eye in creation was fixed solely upon her. Their existence was a perfect, sun-drenched idyll. Demeter kept Kori close, obsessively sheltered in the lush fields of Nysa, a place so vibrant and protected that it was practically a paradise carved out of the world's most fertile soil. But while Demeter focused her incredible power on protecting the surface, she foolishly forgot one crucial geological truth. The world has layers, and beneath the vibrant soil she commanded lay the impenetrable, lightless kingdom ruled by a god who knew nothing of warmth or mercy. Hades, the king of the dead, the silent, wealthy one, the brother of Zeus, existed in an eternal state of cold, magnificent isolation. He was the most powerful being whom no mortal ever dared name, reigning over legions of shadows and mountains of untold riches, yet possessing nothing truly bright or alive. His kingdom was vast, his power absolute, but his life was an endless, echoing silence. And this silence was about to be shattered by an obsession so deep it would literally break the earth. Can you imagine the sheer audacity? A god who commands silence and despair decides he must possess the very essence of joy and blooming life? It was a contradiction so violent, so inherently destructive, that a catastrophe no one saw coming was already inevitable. But Hades did not act alone. Oh no! This was a conspiracy hatched in the highest, most gilded halls of Olympus, a treacherous pact sealed by the king of the gods himself, Zeus. The tale they tell is usually one of sudden passion, but the truth is far darker. Zeus, ever the political schemer, recognized that Hades needed a queen to stabilize his terrifying domain, and he saw Kor as the perfect, expendable pawn to achieve divine balance. Demeter, his own sister, was kept deliberately in the dark. Zeus knew that if the goddess of the harvest caught even a whiff of this plan, she would unleash a famine that would dismantle civilization in days. So, secrecy was paramount, sealed by the oath of Olympus. The stage was set for the ultimate betrayal. Demeter had placed her trust in her brother and her confidence in her own power, believing her daughter was safe among the nymphs and the flowers she controlled. She was fatally wrong. The day of the abduction was meticulously planned, a moment engineered to catch the maiden at her most vulnerable, her most distracted, right when her mother's vigilant eye was momentarily turned. Persephone, carefree and innocent, was enjoying a morning among her companions, chasing butterflies and weaving garlands of narcissus and hyacinth. But one flower, one single terrifying bloom, was not placed there by chance. It was a trap forged by Gaia herself, manipulated by Hades' dark command, a narcissus of such unearthly beauty and intoxicating scent that it demanded the full, undivided attention of the maiden. It was the most perfect snare ever conceived. When Kor reached down, captivated by this unnatural splendor, the ground beneath her did not just tremble, it screamed. The earth, which had protected her for so long, betrayed her in an instant. A fissure opened, a gaping maw of blackness wider and deeper than any chasm known to man, erupting from the very foundations of reality. And from that chasm, riding in a chariot pulled by immortal black steeds, whose breath was the freezing mist of the Styx, emerged the king of the underworld. The air instantly went cold, and the sound of silence was deafening. The vibrant sunlight was swallowed by the sudden darkness, and the scent of flowers was replaced by the terrifying, sulphurous smell of eternal death. This was not romance. This was brute force and overwhelming power. The king of the dead seized the maiden of spring, his massive hands closing around the living light of the world. Her screams, sharp and thin, echoed for only a moment before the darkness consumed them entirely. Persephone vanished, pulled down into a world of eternal night, a captive queen yanked from the sun she embodied. And in that terrifying, final moment, as the earth sealed itself shut, leaving only a scar on the landscape, the catastrophic chain of events was initiated. When Demeter returned, she found only shattered flowers, an unbearable silence, and a hole in the world where her daughter used to be. The consequences of this silent, swift act of divine obsession would plunge the entire mortal realm into a nightmare scenario, triggering the Great Famine. Get ready, because what happened next was not just a quest for a daughter, but a war against the heavens, a standoff between love and death, setting the stage for the most dramatic cosmic crisis Olympus had ever faced. The entire story of Hades and Persephone begins now, and trust me, you won't believe the terrifying price paid for that single pomegranate seed. The ground stopped shaking, but the tremor in the cosmos was just beginning. When the abyssal fissure sealed itself shut, the silence that fell upon the Nysian fields was more deafening than 1,000 earthquakes combined. Imagine the world holding its breath, sensing the unthinkable transgression that had just occurred. Persephone, the core, the maiden of eternal spring, was gone, wiped from the surface of the earth as if she were merely a dewdrop evaporated by the sun. The only evidence left was a broken stem and the lingering, sulphurous scent of raw, primordial death, a scar upon the vibrant green. This silent catastrophe was a scream only one being could truly hear, and she felt it pierce her divine heart like a poisoned arrow forged in the depths of Tartarus itself. Demeter, the mighty lady of the grain, arrived moments later, her golden sandals hitting the freshly violated earth with a soundless thud of disbelief. Her vision swam with a terrifying certainty. Her daughter, her reason for the turning of the seasons, the very embodiment of burgeoning life, was nowhere to be found. The air tasted of betrayal and deep, chilling cold, a sensation utterly foreign to her domain of warmth and growth and flourishing life. What followed was not grief, not yet. It was pure, distilled, white-hot, panic-fueled fury, the kind that can unmake mountains and scorch the plains. Demeter began to search, initiating a frantic, desperate, and utterly relentless campaign across the entire known world in a matter of minutes. She tore through the valleys and scaled the highest peaks of Olympus and beyond, calling out Persephone's name, Core, Core, a cry so heartbreaking it made the dryads weep sap and the mountain goats tremble in their rocky shelters. Every nymph, every river god, every spirit of the wild was interrogated with a terrifying, demanding intensity. But the Olympian conspiracy was already chillingly airtight. Zeus had demanded silence, sealing the lips of those who had witnessed the terrifying event, and few dared defy the Skyfather, even knowing the horror that had transpired beneath their very feet. They averted their eyes and stammered excuses. They whispered lies and feigned ignorance of the screaming girl and the black chariot that briefly stained the sunlit world. They were complicit in the most terrible crime against nature, and their silence was deafening proof of their cowardice and their fear of Hades' reach. Only two powerful beings dared to even look upon the scene with clear eyes. Hecate, the enigmatic goddess of witchcraft and crossroads, who perceives the liminal spaces, and Helios, the great sun titan, who sees absolutely everything that occurs on the surface of the earth from his eternal journey. Demeter eventually collapsed at a crossroads, exhausted and enraged, the divine power draining from her body with every fruitless passing hour. And it was there, Hecate, shrouded in mystery and bearing burning torches, appeared, ready to illuminate the distraught goddess's path. Hecate hadn't seen the abduction itself, but she had heard the heart-wrenching screams echoing from the underworld's sudden, momentary breach, the agonizing sounds of life being dragged down into absolute, cold death. She pointed Demeter toward the one witness who possessed true, undeniable clarity, Helios, the all-seeing eye of the cosmos. Now, imagine this confrontation. The goddess of absolute life, golden and wild with grief, facing the eternal, impartial eye of the universe, demanding the terrible truth about her stolen child. Helios, bathed in unbearable, searing white, hesitated. He knew the cosmic cost of this secret. He knew the devastating, world-altering consequences of revealing Zeus's complicity in the whole terrifying scheme, the shattering of the Olympian family unit that such a revelation would bring. But faced with the absolute, consuming sorrow and raw, terrifying power of Demeter, even the impartial sun god could not maintain the facade of neutrality. He spoke, his voice booming across the atmosphere, confirming the nightmare in agonizing detail. It wasn't a monster, nor a roving mortal thief. It was Hades, the silent king, who had taken her, bursting through the earth on a command issued by his very own brother, Zeus, the one man Demeter thought she could implicitly trust with the safety of her daughter and the balance of the world. The knowledge hit her like a lightning bolt from the hands of the betrayer himself, but infinitely colder and more destructive. It was a calculated, cold-blooded ambush, orchestrated by the supposed head of their family, the ruler of Olympus, purely for political gain and cosmic stability. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was the ultimate act of familial betrayal, a statement that Demeter's power and motherhood meant nothing compared to the demands of the cosmic status quo and Zeus's need to keep the powerful Hades contained and content. Her grief instantly transformed into a deadly, focused weapon. If Olympus, If the very structure of the cosmos allowed this darkness to thrive and sanctioned this terrible act, then Olympus could no longer rely on her gifts, and they would pay the ultimate ecological price. The world, the fragile, beautiful world that sustained them all with its bounty, would pay the price for their cruelty and their agonizing silence. Demeter retreated from the scene of the crime, but she did not return to Mount Olympus to scream at Zeus, though the temptation must have been overwhelming. No, her retaliation would be far more subtle, far more comprehensive, and far more devastating than a mere shouting match or a show of physical strength. She walked away from her divine duties, shedding her golden vestments, abandoning her sacred role as the life-giver, the nurturer of all things green and vital. She adopted the disguise of a weary, aged mortal woman, cloaked in the blackest wool, erasing all traces of her godly radiance and renaming herself Doso, the sorrowful wanderer, symbolizing the agony she now embodied. And as she abandoned her divinity and pulled her power back into herself, the world began to choke almost instantly. The fertile fields of Greece, Italy, and Asia Minor, the lands that had previously responded instantly to her smallest blessing, started to turn hard and brittle and unforgiving. The seeds planted with such hope refused point-blank to germinate. The vital, sustaining moisture evaporated into the air. The stalks of grain, usually bursting with life and heavy with future harvest, withered and shriveled into dusty impotence before they could ripen and feed the masses. This was not just a natural drought. It was the active, terrifying cessation of life's regenerative cycle, an unnatural, intentional act of cosmic sabotage performed by the goddess who embodied fertility and growth. She had pulled the plug on the world's ecosystem, holding it hostage until her daughter was safely returned from the abyss. The air itself seemed thinner, heavier with unspoken despair, a growing, terrible hunger that gripped the throat of man and beast alike. Demeter wandered in this self-made wasteland, the personification of despair, still searching, still hoping for a sign of her daughter's location, completely unaware of the horrifying realities facing Persephone down below. And down below, in the realm of endless night, where the sun never shines and silence reigns supreme, Persephone was facing her own impossible trial. Her journey into the silent, terrifying kingdom of Hades had just begun, and the clock was already ticking toward that infamous moment involving a single, fateful fruit and the consumption of the Underworld's law. The dust settled over the Nicean fields, but the silence that followed the seismic event was far more terrifying than the roar of the chasm itself. Demeter, the golden-haired goddess whose breath was the wheat field and whose touch was the burgeoning vine, arrived moments too late, her heart already a cold stone of premonition. She called out, her voice a sound meant to resonate across continents, meant to summon life from the deepest soil, but the only answer was the mocking whisper of the wind over the broken earth. This was not a disappearance. This was a surgical removal, an act of sheer, overwhelming cosmic violence directed at the source of all earthly nourishment. She searched the meadow where minutes before her daughter had been gathering the infamous narcissus, a flower, we now know, planted by Zeus as the ultimate, glittering bait. Her hands, usually gentle on the stalk of grain, tore at the soil, clawing through the dirt, demanding an answer the silence would never provide. She became a ragged, desolate vision of grief, Her vibrant robes turned to ash and her golden hair covered in the dust of the crime scene. For 9 agonizing days and 9 equally despairing nights, the goddess of the harvest wandered the face of the earth, her sorrow a tangible shroud that began to dim the very light of the sun. She refused to eat, refused to drink the sweet nectar of the gods, her divine powers turning inward, focused solely on the terrifying void left by her stolen Kore. She spoke to every creature, every nymph, every shepherd, looking for a witness to the impossible crime, but the gods had conspired in silence, and the mortals were too insignificant to notice the passage of a chariot pulled by the stallions of night. Demeter's mind was a storm of denial and desperation, knowing instinctively that only a force of absolute power, a force she had always believed was her ally, could have achieved such flawless treachery. The very concept of her daughter existing in the place where life fundamentally ceases to exist was an unbearable, maddening paradox. Finally, broken but not defeated, she turned her gaze skyward, confronting the one entity who sees all, Helios, the Titan god of the sun, whose flaming chariot traversed the heavens every single day, whose light touched every hidden corner of the cosmos. Helios knew. He had seen the entire brutal transaction, witnessed the earth tearing open, the black chariot swallowing the innocent light of the world, and the silent, terrifying face of the king of the dead. And Helios, fearing the wrath of Zeus but unable to lie under the gaze of a mother's bottomless sorrow, spoke the devastating truth. He described the black chariot, the overwhelming power, and the sealed fate. But then he added the crucial, sickening detail that detonated Demeter's universe. It was Zeus's will, he whispered across the ether. In that instant, the grief that had been consuming Demeter was replaced by a pure, white-hot, world-shattering fury. Her target shifted instantly from the kidnapper to the betrayer, and the earth itself became the weapon in her hands, a vast, suffering testament to Olympian betrayal. This was no longer about finding her daughter. This was about punishing the entire cosmic order for its complicity in the crime. The goddess of absolute life decided that if her daughter was to be locked in absolute death, then the surface world would know absolute desolation, a terrifying mirroring of the void. Meanwhile, deep below the surface, where the light of Helios could never penetrate and time held no meaning, Persephone was experiencing the ultimate horror of the Greek cosmos. The journey down had been a dizzying, terrifying plunge through sheer nothingness, ending only when the black chariot screeched to a halt on the desolate shores of the river Acheron, the river of woe. This was Hades' realm, and it was structured not by chaos or fiery demons, but by terrifying, immutable law and unending silence. Everything here was gray, cold, and utterly still, save for the ceaseless, mournful wailing of the newly arrived shades. Her first vision was not of her captor's face in the dark, but of the river Styx, the terrifying boundary, the body of water by which even the mighty gods swore their unbreakable, fearful oaths. This was the point of no return, the physical manifestation of her entrapment, flowing with the weight of eternal consequence. The ancient ferryman, Charon, whose job it was to transport the shades across the dark waters, was the first real resident of the underworld she encountered, a skeletal figure whose silence was heavier than any shout. He didn't acknowledge her. Only the silent, imposing presence of Hades, the true master of this domain. Persephone, the vibrant, spring-born girl, stood out against the swirling, mournful masses of the dead, a flash of painful, impossible color in a monochrome landscape of eternal regret and lost potential. The air itself felt thick, heavy with unlived lives and forgotten memories pressing down on her lungs. She was realizing, with horrifying clarity, that she wasn't just in a prison. She was in the administrative center of death itself, the place where all existence eventually surrendered its claim to life, and that surrender was absolute. Hades, the silent king, had not dragged her screaming into a dark dungeon filled with chains and torches. Instead, he led her directly to his palace, a massive, labyrinthine structure of polished obsidian, dark jewels, and cold, glittering gold, magnificent and yet chillingly empty. He was not a passionate captor. He was a proprietor presenting his rightful domain to its missing queen. He placed her, the terrified, life-filled goddess, directly before the great, vacant throne reserved specifically for the Queen of the Dead.